There are people who say consumer choice is dead and consumers don't know what they're agreeing to and there's no way to give them that choice. I don't agree with that. I think if you can really tell a clean, simple, straightforward narrative about what you're doing and be very clear about the choice associated with your products and services, that is the future. And honestly, I just think we're all clawing our way back across the ecosystem from not doing a very good job.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Identity Architects, the InfoSum podcast that spotlights the leaders in the media industry shaping the future of data-driven advertising. I'm your host Ben Chiketi, and this week my co-host Lauren Wetzel had the opportunity to sit down with Julia Shullman, General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at Telly. This is a fascinating conversation between two people who have a clear and genuine passion for data privacy. Before we jump into that conversation, this is a reminder to hit that subscribe button so you'll be alerted when new episodes of Identity Architects land. But without any further delay, here's Lauren and Julia.
So I am so excited to have someone I have long admired and someone who is such a wealth of knowledge for our industry, Julia Shullman, General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at Telly. So for anyone who doesn't know you, can you give us a quick intro to Julia Shullman and to Telly?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Lauren. And I have long admired you and the podcast. So I'm really excited to be on and joining you. So for anyone who doesn't know me, Julia Shullman, I'm currently at Telly, but I've been in the ad industry for about a decade. First at AppNexus and Xandr, where we overlapped. More recently at Triple Lift, and I have my own advisory firm and then joined Telly, who is one of my clients. So really excited to be chatting with you.
And my favorite way that we start off this podcast is actually through quick fire questions. So I'm going to fire off a question. You, Julia, are going to fire off an answer, and our audience is going to learn a little bit about you. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to dive straight in.
Let's do it.
First up, earliest memory of advertising.
So I grew up in a news-obsessed family pre-internet. So my first recollection was in the New York Times and Time Magazine and National Enquirer print ads.
I don't know if we've ever gotten print ads on that, but I kind of love that. I mean, I still have magazines, so I still admire the advertising in print. Second question, what did you want to be when you were younger?
I thought through this one. Honestly, I don't remember, but I'm going to say business person. We're a family of entrepreneurs across my dad and my mom's side. Everyone sort of had their own business or started their own business. I had a newspaper route as a little kid. So we were always hustling and trying out new things.
Well, you are an entrepreneur and have run many successful businesses, but also one that is your own. So I think you mission accomplished. What was your first job in either advertising or marketing?
So my first real job was at AppNexus back in 2013, 2014, but I did work on a little ad network for a media company prior to going to AppNexus. I had no idea what it was at the time, but as soon as I'd been at AppNexus for a year, it all made sense.
What drew you to the advertising industry, either to AppNexus or maybe to that other company, and also just what keeps you in it?
Yeah, so the thing that drew me to it is three things. I think the first one is the challenge and strategy in the industry. So it's such an interrelated marketplace, and I liken it to playing multiple games of chess across multiple chessboards, and it's fun for anyone who likes that. The second one is just the people, really, really smart, really engaged, really interesting people. Dan Hegwood, who you know, hired me in to AppNexus, former colleague of mine, and pretty much everyone I've worked with has been like him. And then I'd say, the last thing is just the continued innovation in the space. It's never boring. We might not be saving lives, but if you think about it at a macro level, we are powering the content that we all consume every single minute of every single day online. So we wouldn't have the internet as we know it today without advertising.
And it's the people that brought you on this podcast, not just myself, who has been dying to have you come and talk to so many Identity Architects audiences, but also our mutual friend and former colleague, Alex, who had actually suggested you. So the people definitely resonates a lot with me. And also, I love the idea of just no 2 days are the same and there's constant innovation. So that's a great answer. what advice would you give someone who's just starting a career in either media or even advertising specifically, like our industry? What's the best
Mhm.
advice?
Yeah, two things when I thought back to it is first, just do your research, and second is have different jobs. And if you kind of click into the first one, this is a complicated ecosystem. You need to watch trainings, you need to ask questions, you need to really try to understand what's going on at a macro level. So from a strategic perspective, various commercial interests, but then also, dive a bit deep and understand how the ecosystem actually operates, like what is happening behind the scenes from a technical perspective. We don't have to be engineers, but it really does help to understand how things work. And then the second one is raise your hand and try different things. I think you're similar to me. We'll talk about career a little bit later, but when a new opportunity gets thrown in front of you, do it. Like dive in, roll up your sleeves. No one knows what they're doing, right? Fake it till you make it. Again, ask the questions, do your research, and try it out. I've had a number of different jobs across the ecosystem. Most of that from just being curious and taking opportunities when they were handed to me.
I love that. I also think it's what makes folks stand out in our industry. Those who have done the homework, who have done the research, who have kind of a breadth of different functions and different experiences. You can sort of always tell those individuals. I mean, especially being in this new space called data clean rooms or privacy enhancing technology,
Mm.
which I know we'll get into. I always appreciate when people have like very thoughtful questions because they've maybe researched a little bit, but they still need more knowledge from those of us who are spending all of our days in the space.
Mhm.
Next question, a couple more quick fires, and this one's a two-parter. What keeps you awake at night, and also what gets you up in the morning? And this is not one of the questions on the list, but I also now am curious: are you a morning person or an evening person?
Okay, so the funny thing is, the thing that keeps me up at night is also the thing that gets me up in the morning. When I thought about this one, it's how to get out of my head the
Mm.
strategy and information that I'm just constantly thinking about at all times. And I know you being in the clean room space and trying to figure out how to synthesize and explain hard, new emerging concepts to people in a digestible and understandable way. So that's the hardest part. Every day, you're kind of drained by the end of the day trying to explain tough concepts in an easy way. But then you get up again because this is what we're doing and it's interesting. And when you hit that point when there's an aha moment in your audience or your stakeholders or clients, whomever, it's such a win. It's what powers me. And I am a morning person. I am not a night person. It's probably the main reason, I left law firm life because we would work all night, every night. And I would much prefer to get up at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, having gone to bed at like 8, 9, 10, and power through stuff.
I too am a morning person. I also joke it's why I love having clients and colleagues who are based in Europe or Asia, so that there's even more of an excuse for me to be that much more of a morning person, and then more of an excuse to kind of cut off at the end of the day because I am an early to bed person as well.
Love
Um,
it. Love
to,
it.
to what you said keeps you up at night, this is a perfect transition to one of my favorite questions, which is how would you describe what you do within media and advertising to a 10-year-old? And you kind of already alluded to so much of what you do, what I do, is just that translation, that sort of like making things digestible.
Yeah. So from a privacy perspective, I would just say simply, I'm helping make sure the data that is used to decide what ads to show you online is properly managed. Like, period, full stop. Lots deeper than that, but at a high level, that's what it is. From my legal hat, I generally say I'm kind of doing two things. One, I'm making sure companies know what's required of them and what's expected of them, and that they've built that into their processes, into their product. And then on the flip side, I'm actually helping them think about strategic opportunities and maybe get out ahead of something or use it a bit more strategically to their advantage.
I love that. And final quick fire question. If there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
I have to admit, I asked ChatGPT for some suggestions. We can talk about AI later. So a couple things. I plugged into it. What would be a soundtrack song for someone who's kind of intense, likes to work on hard things, but also loves to take a good vacation and like have a good margarita and cook a lot? And, and it spit out a few, but the three ones that I recognized were Under Pressure by David Bowie, which I do listen to sometimes when I need to psych myself up. Don't Stop Believin' by Journey, also everyone's favorite wedding song. And then Lose Yourself by Eminem, because sometimes you just need to like put all the distractions aside and dig in and really have like a strategic session. Those are the three.
That's amazing. That's actually maybe a really solid use case for ChatGPT. So well done. Well done there. And all three songs will be added to our playlist, which I listen to. As you can imagine, with so many, unique and interesting people on the podcast, and always consistently asking this question. We also ask this question of any new hire. It's kind of how we started to just have some level of connectivity across, not just, hey, what's your job, what's going on, is just always sort of throw that question at them at one of our first team gatherings. So I've enjoyed seeing this playlist grow, and we will add those three.
Such a cool tradition. I didn't realize that. I'm definitely going to go download it and start working out to it or walking to it.
Oh yeah, and this podcast is not sponsored by Spotify, although you can find the podcast there. But yeah, it's a Spotify playlist, and I will send it to you.
Love it.
All right, let's get into what I'm most excited about, which is your career. So you have a very impressive career and track record of success at the places you've worked. From our time working together, Julia, when we were you were at a Nexus and then into Xander within AT&T. I always knew you were very popular at ad tech conferences and within our company. You're speaking on panels, but then I actually saw you very recently in action at the IAPP's Global Privacy Summit this year. And that's when I realized you're kind of a bit of a full-blown celebrity. And I joke about it. I know I'm going to make you uncomfortable on this podcast, but that's my job. But it's an acknowledgement of your amazing career. So can you tell us, for this audience, a little bit more about your career path? And then I'd also love to just learn a little bit more about Telly, how and sort of why you decided to join.
Okay, let me digest. First of all, very flattered. Thank you. I guess I'm a nerdy celebrity if you get that, but we'll take it. We'll take it. You are too. One day, maybe we'll be on a panel together. I don't know if we've ever done that, but we'll try to do it. But from a career perspective, thinking through this, I think there's a couple of themes that weave their way throughout my different jobs. And, the first one I already alluded to, which is not saying no to opportunities, but that is connected to faking it till you make it, working really hard, but smart. Like everyone could work all the time, every day. You can't do that. And then I think I get bored easily and I like to build stuff and do new things. And so I'm constantly trying to jump to the next new interesting thing, not because it's sort of the sexy thing to do, but because it's a challenge to build up processes, to build up a product, to build up a new offering. So I started my career not at all in privacy and not at all in ads. I started in M&A, but I actually started in M&A because I thought I was going to be a tax lawyer. And within a month of starting at a law firm doing tax, I was bored out of my mind. And the M&A folks were interesting and they were working on fun, challenging things that were macro level connecting the dots, across the company trying to achieve its strategy, whether they were trying to buy a company or sell a company. So started off there and started off during the before the financial crisis, but really kind of became an actual full-blown associate during the financial crisis when law firms were laying people off, when the deals were really messy, when they were falling apart. And so I got initial experience kind of being a very senior person on deals, honestly, when I didn't have the credentials to do it, but more senior people had been laid off or, left the firm, had to manage client relationships and then work on super messy, gnarly projects, that were multi-billion dollar deals. And I know you did this coming from a consulting perspective, and it really taught you to think from a macro and a micro level and understand how to work cross-functionally with not only lawyers, but bankers, your clients, you name it. So it was a really good boot camp, I think, for going into a company and going into an early stage company where you just need to move fast and you need to achieve your goals and you need to hit stuff fast. So that was kind of my baseline. I went in-house. I took whatever job I could get because I just wanted to work at a company. I worked at a British media company. And I worked in M&A at a British media company. And to be frank, one of the themes emerged. They moved sort of slow. It was kind of a boring job. I'd been doing M&A for a long time. And so I looked for other opportunities within the company and started supporting other business lines and learning IP and learning commercial deals and things that were not, pure M&A. Got hired into AppNexus on the theme train, kind of was hired in as a commercial and product counsel, was working on the publisher side of the business. We did a number of acquisitions. We launched a whole bunch of new emerging disruptive products. The pre-bid, we spun up prebid.org. We launched the ad server, which is kind of the only independent ad server to compete with Google at the time. And GDPR hit. And, our head of privacy is also well known in the industry, David Weinberg. Very hard to replace. We did a search for 6 months and we could not find a replacement for him. I think you know how it goes in privacy. We found a lot of good policy people, like policy wonks, who are incredibly thoughtful, very, know their thing, but don't necessarily know how to apply it to product or to apply it to a messy ecosystem. And then we found people who maybe would be good at product, but didn't know anything about the business, about our product, and certainly didn't know how to kind of operate within AppNexus. So Nithya and Brian, both of them from AppNexus, came to me and said, you're the lead attorney for the publisher side of the business. Privacy is super important to our strategy. We can't win business. We can't convince clients to move over to our ad server to use our header bidding product without a privacy strategy, not compliance, but like a literal product. Will you take it on? And initially I said no. I didn't know anything. I wasn't a privacy person. Everyone in the industry who did privacy had been doing it for 5+ years, was well known, had like originally spun up initiatives that, were the initiatives in the space like DAA, NAI, opt out. And they kind of wore me down. And so I tried it out. They said, if you don't like it, we'll go hire someone else. And of course, once I started working on it, it was really interesting. That led to working on industry initiatives like the IAB Transparency and Consent Framework. And then, we were acquired by AT&T, and that's when you and I first met. And that was awesome too, like to work with a big company. I sort of transitioned into helping out on public policy and lobbying initiatives and sort of the go-to for ad tech initiatives for AT&T and for Warner, and just kind of understanding the interplay at a very big company that was very powerful and knew how to really think about public policy initiatives. But then within a year, per usual, I got bored and I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be in builder mode. I didn't really want to be at a big company. Went to Triple Lift, knew that we were going to try to exit the business pretty fast. COVID hit, insanity ensued, but really great culture. And we ended up selling the business pretty quickly, so that I didn't focus, frankly, as much on privacy at the company, because for the majority of my time there, we were sort of in sale mode or in COVID process mode. But it gave me the ability to hire in a great team across legal, across product, across engineering, and really let them run with it. And really, for the first time, not be the lead out in front, but be the person behind the scenes who's really empowering the team to do what they need to do and to shine and go talk at conferences. And we ended up acquiring 1+X. And then again, per usual, I had done the same job for years, got bored, stepped back, started something with Alex Cohn, as you know, also started my own advisory firm, and was enjoying kind of working with a number of different companies across the ecosystem, thinking about different issues. And Telly came knocking. And with Telly, that is the first company in over a decade that is not a pure ad tech company that I've worked with. And it is such a fascinating, interesting business model. And we'll get into it a bit later. But, the themes emerged again, building something new. They're a seed stage startup, literally building a product that has never existed in the market. So every single legal issue, every regulatory issue, every privacy issue is a matter of first impression. Love it. Absolutely love it. That's what I want to do. And then working really hard. I don't do well when I'm not busy and don't have a whole bunch of balls in the air. So here we are. It's kind of that arc of bored, working hard, super interesting initiatives, taking on opportunities when they're handed to you, and faking it till you make it.
I learned a couple of new things about you, and I love the themes you've captured of you loving things that are new and innovative that never existed before. You clearly like new challenges and work that keeps you on your toes. I think that's so important. I also like the background you've had proves something I actually always say to people is important to have in a career, which is showcasing you can operate in different environments. So diversity of the size of a company, the maturity of the company, the mission of the company. You've proved a large law firm, you can do it. AppNexus, fast growing tech, you can do it. AT&T, big corporate machine, you can do it. And even more exciting, you now are flexing this entrepreneurial side, this startup environment with both your consultancy and now Telly. And I just think that's so important, navigating and succeeding in different environments. And so that's my key takeaway of what you just said, Julia.
Yeah, love doing new things, but also, I mean, you obviously know. I think it's. I would say I'd like to think I'm a good judge of character and a good judge of skills, like soft skills and hard skills. And so when I'm thinking about a new opportunity, it is all about the team, and it's all about how the team operates and kind of how we all come together as one, not just at the management level, but across the whole company. And I've been very fortunate to thankfully have made the right calls, I think, over the last decade. And hopefully, once again, but that is one of the many reasons I went to Telly.
Before we get into Telly, I want to take a couple steps back and just think more broadly on privacy. And it's far more than a nuisance. So even if not everyone has realized that, why is privacy so crucial for the digital ecosystem? And how have you seen it evolve over the years?
So in terms of why it's so crucial, I'll take that one first, and then we'll get into the high-level evolution in a second. Why it's so crucial, if you think about the digital ecosystem, it is fundamentally all about a company interacting with their users or with their user base. And so at a fundamental level, that means that they are interacting with people. And so there is personal data involved in order to interact with people, even if, it's at a very basic level, you need to be collecting, using, and sharing personal data in some way. And so just at its fundamental core, like from a building blocks perspective, companies need to have some level of access to data about a device or an individual in order to interact with them. And so I think, that's just how the internet built up and how it's evolved over time. I think as we've built and developed more and more ways to get online and to consume content, originally started with your laptop with a computer, not even a laptop, a computer, literal display, laptop, mobile phone, smart TV, you name it. It has become more complex as companies look to interact with consumers across all of these different devices. And then it's also become more complex and more sophisticated as technology has evolved, and companies have learned how to connect those devices and also learned how to connect data that is collected and used in different ways. So collecting data offline, for example, and matching it to data online and vice versa. So started at a really basic level with a literal major computer that was just connected to a household and very hard to connect to a user, on through to multiple devices, new technology and new ways to collect data and connect that to those various devices. So fundamental to the ability for a company to be able to operate in the digital ecosystem is to continue to be able to access some of that data and actually interact with their consumers and measure how well they do. And then I think your second part of that question, if I'm recalling, was remind me again, because I have lost my train of thought.
No, I mean, I think you covered it. Just how has it evolved over the years? And I think that depiction of where it started and sort of where it's going with so many devices and so many more touch points, I think is right. One sort of add on to it, and I think you might have been going here, is that I've heard you also say before that privacy is broken. And I'm curious, like, can you explain what you mean by that? And then also maybe because I'm an optimist, and I think we're working with a purpose here, how can it be fixed?
Yeah. So I have said privacy is broken, and it is, you're totally right. It is connected to the way privacy and the digital ecosystem have evolved over time. So if you think back to the days when DoubleClick and Abacus in 1999, we're talking about a merger so that companies could connect your cookie ID on your one display in your house to offline data. The industry kind of spun up because regulators got nervous about that, and they pushed out a code of conduct, and they pushed out a pretty simple cookie-based opt-out, where users could opt out of certain uses. So maintaining state on a user across devices and building up profiles across devices. But the industry from that point on, I would argue, despite certain efforts, has always stayed a couple steps behind. So sort of as we've moved to cross devices, as we've moved to more sophisticated online onboarding of offline data, we haven't really gotten out ahead of how to explain what we're doing to users, how to give them the right choice, and more importantly, how to more efficiently and more securely enable access to data and enable sharing of data. I mean, this is where, InfoSum comes in. And so we sort of operated the way we always operated in sort of a spray of data across the ecosystem when we're trying to serve an ad or measure an ad. We didn't get user choice right. We didn't get transparency right. And we never educated the consumer in the right way. And so we're just playing whack-a-mole at this point as regulators are getting more and more frustrated about how the ecosystem is operated.
Well, you're bringing up something that I think is such an interesting tie-in to Telly, because I think everything you just said, the way that when I talk about it as a problem, I typically say, your first instinct when you have a relationship with some company typically isn't data. It's like data kind of comes, or data, even though data may be at the very start, there's like an exchange there. And again, when you're just talking to family and friends around a dinner table, the fact that then you've had to introduce some level of controls and some level of language that needs to exist. It's why, from a company perspective, they feel like, oh, this is different, this has changed, and this is now disrupting the consumer experience. When it's like, well, if you were always going to use that data in some way, shape, or form, it's challenging, but it always should have existed from the start. And I think the sort of business model of Telly and the premise of Telly is really interesting. And just in full transparency, like I've downloaded the Telly app, like I've comfortably submitted all of my, answers to questions on the app. But I'm jumping around a little bit, but I actually really love, as a build on this, just to hear a little bit about Telly and frankly, how is Telly approaching privacy, especially related to sort of like, what is Telly? What's this business model that exists?
Yeah. So I'll kind of walk you through, but just for the audience to understand the business model and sort of how we got here. So our founder is Ilya Posen, who founded Pluto TV. And so he was one of if not the first person to develop a free ad-supported streaming service. His thesis, well before everyone else, was people like free things, right? They don't want to pay for a bunch of different streaming services. He saw that the fractious nature of the streaming industry that was coming and did come, figured, why not provide certain free content to folks in exchange for some ads? So he has sold that company and kind of took a step back after that and said, hold on a second, let's bring that business model to devices. Like, why doesn't that exist for TVs and for other types of products and services? So what we're doing at our core is we are developing, manufacturing, and distributing direct to consumers a high-end TV. And the difference is threefold. One, we do not charge for the TV. Instead, we have what we call a transparent value exchange between user and us that is very clear that we are powering the device through ads. And in order to do that, we need to collect, use, and share certain data. And we try to be very transparent about it. We talk about how we develop that. And the second piece is we actually have the second screen. And that's more of a user experience thing where, we said people are sitting in front of their TVs with their phones and 14 other devices. Let's actually have, another device that's attached to the TV, and users don't have to sit there on their phone. They can do a whole lot of the things that they might be doing on a second screen on the device. And at the same time, we're going to show them relevant ads. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback. To your point, we've got, a ton of people on our wait list. Everyone who's been testing out our device, we've gotten really good feedback from them. They're all, beta testers, so giving us great feedback on things. And, so far, so good. And obviously, from my perspective, starting out fundamentally at a business that at its core has privacy, as a key pillar of its strategy, and building from the start, the right practices, the right policies, the right disclosures, has been such a treat because normally I come in a little bit late and sort of have to unwind things at certain companies.
I think that origin is so important, and I love reminding the audience of his background and that he always sort of had a vision of, people like free things, people need to consume that content, and it sort of starts there. Because again, I just think that there's so many things where it's like, oh, wait, we have a business model here because for one reason or another, we have been collecting this data. Now there's something we can do with it. When someone starts and thinks like, oh, I want to be a Telly customer, I want, access to this TV, they know what they're getting into very, very early, and there's a very clear exchange in terms of the value that you as a consumer are getting. But then I also really love the user experience standpoint as well, because when have we really reinvented outside of the technology of a 4K or, the actual device? Like, when have you really thought about the way that people are actually consuming, which to your point is on a second screen, and there's an appetite, an ability to kind of consume more there.
Yeah.
And it's just US to start, correct?
It is just the US. I think you were probably going into like maybe how would other markets look at this. So we are focused on the US for now. And, certainly over time we'll look at other markets. And you were probably alluding to maybe some of the conversations and challenges we would have, for example, in the European market. I certainly stayed close to kind of some of the challenges that Facebook is pushing through. And I think they're doing a really good job of educating, regulators and educating consumers about how to provide, different options, but also staying true to their business model and staying true also to the value exchange that, they've given to their users over the years.
Yeah, this is a very, very clear business model, I think, and a very innovative one. To go back to sort of the digital ecosystem and how it's evolved, this move away from cookies has been around, been discussed for a while. Obviously, even more so the past handful of months. But Mozilla and Apple were some of the first major organizations turning them off in their browsers. But consumers' heightened awareness around what happens with their data seems to be the driver of that. What do you think is driving this awareness? And what maybe, as we talk about sort of that evolution of the ecosystem, what were some key moments, even throughout the last years, that have had an impact on how privacy is being viewed now and that have really changed how so many businesses have operated? Like, is it just consumers driving it? Like, what are kind of the pieces there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple drivers from a consumer perspective, and then there's certainly many drivers from a company perspective. So from a consumer perspective, from a communications press perspective, I would say some of the big tentpole moments were, not to pick on Facebook, but when Facebook kind of ran up against some of those hurdles at this point, right, 2016, 2017, when the press really started digging in on some of their data sharing practices and some of the kind of foot faults they made around inaccurate disclosures to users and frankly doing things that users just didn't expect was happening. And they've learned from that. And I think they've got a great team in there that's been really kind of rebuilding their offering. And the press, they're looking for interesting stories, and they're doing what they usually do, which is making sure that consumers understand kind of the products and services they're using. So I think there's definitely been just more awareness and more written about the use of data and data-driven ecosystems. From a company perspective, I think it's a really interesting evolution in the ad ecosystem and beyond. From the early days, we touched on the DoubleClick Abacus merger and then the creation of various industry initiatives, associations. So those were codes of conduct, and they were very limited technical controls, so to speak. So, opt-out controls that were given to consumers. But, up until Mozilla and Apple started removing signal from browsers and started actually removing identifiers in mobile applications, everything privacy related was what I would call Band-Aid. So it was a contract, it was a code of conduct that a company swore on the honor that they actually adhered to. But as Mozilla and Apple and now Google actually started removing access to the identifiers that companies in the ecosystem use to identify a device or a user, and with that started removing access to data that is connected with those identifiers, that's not a compliance issue. That is a fundamental core strategic issue for everyone in the ad digital ecosystem. So
Yeah.
publishers, advertisers wanting to find their users, if they can't connect the dots, if they can't operate the way they were always operating, they have to figure out another way of operating. For the various tech providers in between, the companies you and I have worked for over the years, that fundamentally shifts how you make money, what your strategy is. If you need to change the way you operate at a basic level, it's a huge cost, and you have to really think about what's going to happen. But at a even higher level, it makes you be either defensive or offensive. Maybe you've got a great new opportunity based on where you sit in the ecosystem, or maybe you don't, and you're like fighting for your life and you actually totally pivot and build a new product. So consumers understand more about the ecosystem. They're frankly more concerned about their data, driven by the press, driven by scandals out there. But then companies for so long just viewed this as a compliance issue, didn't see the strategy to it, didn't understand that if they lost access to data, they wouldn't have a business, or at least they'd have to shift their business. And as that signal's continually being removed, it is forcing the ecosystem to wake up and understand how they've operated for the last 15, 20 years and think about where their place is in the future and how they're going to meet their goals and make money.
To your point, this impacts their day-to-day, their business model, and probably most importantly to them, just how they generate revenue. How, given the seat that you've been in and your knowledge of this, like what advice would you give companies on just frankly staying ahead of the privacy regulations, the changes? I mean, obviously, especially in the US, we've got like the total count today. I think it's 16 state legislations, maybe 17. And counting, a federal bill that's in discussions. But how do companies who are impacted as greatly as they are, how can they ensure that they educate their customers and their consumers in the process? Because I think that's where, dear friends of ours like Alex, who's, hard at work on Privacy Sandbox, like where so much criticism comes in because there's so much change, because, businesses are being impacted. It's almost like how do you get people to keep calm, and what do they focus on?
Yeah. God. Well, so there's a lot to focus on, but so I usually tell companies to create a non-shocking news, because I've been trained by some very good product managers, not a product manager myself, but I can be dangerous. I tell companies based on their size and based on where they sit in the ecosystem to create a framework for how they're going to think about this, and create the right team and go from there. And what I mean is, to your point, all of this at its core is being driven by privacy regulations or shifts in the ecosystem. And so you need to keep an eye on what's going on from a privacy perspective, but have a framework through which you look at that. I think every regulation that's out there is predicated on a core set of principles, the Fair Information Practice principles. So if you understand that core set of principles and you understand the sort of spectrum through which a law can fit on those principles, every time there's a new important law that's spinning up, you can look at that new law through that principled lens and understand like where the real fundamental things are different, and frankly where you can just ignore stuff because it's the same. So you got to get the right team that can do that, and that includes, of course, your inside folks and probably some good outside counsel that are very practical and know how to dumb things down. And then on the business side, you need to really take a step back of the right team to think through those principles, how laws are shifting, and how companies are going to react to those laws. Because every company, for the most part, that reacts to those laws today is doing so through a lens that benefits them. They're looking at these laws and they're thinking about how to apply them and how to interpret them. And if they're not, they should be. They're thinking more strategically about how to apply those. So if you understand the laws, you understand the fair information principles, you understand that everything's based on those, and you think about the ecosystem and where people sit in that ecosystem, and based on where they sit, how they wish those laws would be interpreted and applied, you should be able to see what's coming. You should be able to understand how people might think about those laws. And part of that is also thinking about how does the ecosystem operate today and how many people are really going to change the way they operate versus band-aiding over certain things. And you can't do that if you don't have the right cross-functional team in place. So it's not some lawyer sitting in a corner, doesn't understand anything about your business. It's not just a product manager, depending on the size of the business. You need to have your lawyer, you need to have your product person, you need to have base your go-to-market, however you structure that, your marketing, your comms team. And then to your point, how do you educate your clients based on where you sit in the ecosystem, how you're going to react to what's going on in the market, how you think they should be reacting, how are they going to benefit from this? How can you most simply help them do what they need to do? You then craft your message inside out, outside in. So it's not easy, but I think once you get that, it's a lot easier to think about how to put a plan together.
No, I think that's an excellent solution. And I frankly, I have many of prospects, less of my clients. My clients, if they're coming to me and they know that they're going to adopt the technology, they're typically in a good place. But I do oftentimes get someone who's like, oh, I just want a clean room. I'm like, well, why do you want a clean room? And like, kind of what's the orientation? It's like, I don't know. I just heard I need a clean room. And it's like, because of where we're at in the hype cycle, there ends up being just sort of this urgency for the next great thing without that grounding of, well, we have a framework in place, we have a team in place, we have these challenges, we then see, Q, privacy enhancing technology or InfoSum as a solution to those challenges. But before someone even goes into the framework, like how do you best educate someone that now's the time, like this is important, that thinking about this is it's not just sort of the right thing to do because of regulation, but it's actually good for business and frankly to accept it as a crucial part of the business strategy, because it almost feels like that has to happen, and then when they go to do it, everything that you just outlined is exactly right. And I think what will help them to lead to the right decisions, the right budget, the right um, the right sort of recipe for success in preparation. But it almost feels like how do you reach the CEO and let them know that this is a part of your strategy now?
I usually take a two-sided approach. So one is a strategy approach. So, okay, based on our company, how do we make money today? What are our opportunities, and how could privacy enhance those opportunities from a structural perspective or from a strategic perspective? And again, I usually focus on the structural because I feel like in our space, people are more aligned with like, how do we box people out, or how do we provide a solution that no one else can, or how are we going to benefit from getting access to more data versus not, or having a new solution. So that's kind of my first pillar. But I do typically touch on the consumer facing or the comms facing side of it as well, because no one wants to end up in a situation where they are doing something that 9 times out of 10 they weren't doing on purpose, but they end up with a comms firestorm because
Headline.
they're doing, yeah, like it's the worst when you have a reporter kind of knock on your door and you don't have an answer for them.
Yeah.
So that it's those two sides to it.
A little bit of a scare tactic approach when the just do this because it's going to drive opportunities, innovation, it's going to push the business forward. And then it's like, and if you're not going to be bought into the opportunities that this presents for you, for your consumers, for the business, well, then there's also a picture where, you're in hot water when you don't want to be.
Totally. And then the last thing, which, is fundamental, I'm sure, for your business and tends to apply to most other businesses, is it speeds up sales and it helps create less friction from a customer perspective. If you've got a good narrative, if you've got your talking points, if you have your ducks in a row in terms of your compliance program and how your product is compliant or driving compliance or, again, saving money, and you can get through those questions fast and engender trust with your client or your counterparty, it speeds things up. And I think it creates a lasting, trusting relationship where that didn't necessarily exist over the past couple decades.
Well, you have so much knowledge of businesses who have been supporting this for other businesses, and AppNexus and Xandr was a really good opportunity and example of that. But now that you're in the seat at Telly and have that relationship with the consumer, what is that ideal future of consumer choice look like to you, and how can we get there?
Yeah. And so I think about consumer choice, and I would also love to give my perspective on the back end,
Yeah.
given where you guys sit. But from a consumer choice perspective, there are people who say consumer choice is dead and consumers don't know what they're agreeing to, and there's no way to give them that choice. I don't agree with that. I think if you can really tell a clean, simple, straightforward narrative about what you're doing and be very clear about the choice associated with your products and services, that is the future. And honestly, I just think we're all clawing our way back across the ecosystem from not doing a very good job of that unilaterally. And then because of the infrastructure that sits underneath the industry. So let's talk about the infrastructure for a second. I think from an infrastructure perspective, frankly, it's infinitely harder. We've ended up in the space, all too well, where hundreds, thousands of companies on any given ad request have access to personal data. You might restrict what they do from a contractual perspective, but you technically don't really know what they're doing. And a lot of times you're not really speaking the same language. And so if we could re-architect the ecosystem, so to speak, and actually provide pipes that enable companies to allow another company to run a job against their data, to match data, to do everything that we need to do without actually spraying it and moving it across the ecosystem, it's more efficient. It actually allows all of us to control what happens to that data from a technical perspective. And then when you put those consumer controls and the transparency on top of it, you can actually do what you're telling a consumer you want to do, and you can give them the choice that you want to give them. When today, a lot of times when a user comes to you and says, I want to delete my data, access it, whatever, it's nearly technically impossible to comply with that request because the pipes that underlie the ecosystem don't enable it efficiently or frankly at all many times.
I love the connection between the two, because your first statement was just make it, this can be successful and consumers can have choice because you can be very clear in the narrative. But if you're clear on the narrative based on legacy infrastructure, there is no such thing as a clear narrative based on, it's like asterisk, footnote,
Yeah.
caveat.
Go to the like the privacy policies and web portals for these thousands of vendors because we
Yeah,
have no way to connect with them technically.
totally. Which again could mean someone's compliant, could mean that they're, abiding by the law and everything is correct. It just means that's a shitty consumer experience to have to
Terrible. Ooh.
read so much of that detail. So I love that you connected it to the pipes, because you can't really achieve one without the other and without making things more frictionless or easier. And I also love sometimes in the easiest way to explain new technology like ours is simply using the phrase control. Because I do think the way that the infrastructure used to exist is you were constantly handing over control of that data, handing over control of actually, some of what's happening in terms of campaigns. And I think for some people that's scary, because having more control probably means that there's a little bit more work to do or there's more learning. But ultimately, I think that creates that very clear consumer choice narrative where you can kind of stand tall and represent and be behind, that value exchange that you're describing, and be very accurate when you're talking about what you're doing with any data that's kind of coming into our ecosystem. I have two quick questions that I always ask as a wrap up. First is just, what, if anything, did you want to say that you haven't already mentioned, or anything that you want to add that you think is important or do you feel like it all was addressed?
I think it was all addressed, but if I can wrap it up in a bow for anyone, who's listening, because I think your audience generally is not kind of legal and compliance folks, is take the time to understand the commercial and strategic incentives in the ecosystem, understand what that means for privacy and for compliance and access to data, and really look at privacy through that lens. And then the second one is just get the right teams kind of rowing together and working together. Like the jig is up on, asking a lawyer or, asking for someone to provide an opinion on something totally last minute after you've fully baked a product, and want to take it out into the market. Get people involved early. They'll be strategic, and they'll be able to get you to the right place and really understand, how to build something right and lasting.
Yeah. And turn to legal as like enabler of strategy, not as like a police function. I think
totally. Right. And with your, part of it is like, don't ask for sign off on stuff, because it's not actually legal job. Legal job is to explain to you the risks, the opportunities, and some different ways of potentially, doing what you're looking to do.
Completely. And last question we ask everyone, which is a reminder that this podcast is all about the individuals who have pioneered new ways to use data to deliver better customer experiences. Cue identity architects, the cute name. When you look to people you admire in the industry, who would you nominate for us to interview in an upcoming episode?
I would suggest someone I brought in to run privacy product at Triplet. So you know Ari Behringer, I'm sure. He has a fascinating kind of background and lens through which he looks at privacy. Actually started his career working on tax products at Intuit, like full circle background. I wanted to be a tax lawyer, and got into privacy, at Quantcast, and has been, behind the scenes on pretty much every crucial initiative in the industry. I think it would be really interesting for you to talk to him about how he thinks about where, the ad ecosystem is going, the various opportunities, and how he actually builds products and takes it to market.
I love that. Thank you for the suggestion, but also, Julie, just thank you for so much insight, so much practical guidance, and you've lived it and learned it. And I'm so excited to see all that Telly accomplishes. I'm going to be hopefully off the wait list soon and a very loyal customer, but it's awesome to see so much of your success.
Thank you for having me on, and we could talk about this stuff all day.
All day.
Do it again soon.
Yeah, part 2 coming your way.
Thanks again to Julia for being on the podcast. Privacy is such an important topic, and thankfully it's not going away anytime soon. So it was great to get Julia's perspective on the industry and to hear some genuine practical advice for other brands and media owners out there. All that leaves for me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button so you'll know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But until then, thanks for listening.